Travel back in time to the year 2016, the roller coasters that were on the horizon for 2017 you could say were a little underwhelming, especially after the previous year, which brought Lightning Rod, Mako, and Valraven. For 2017, focusing on North America because Europe and Asia were still cranking out major roller coasters, the big hitters were Mystic Timbers, a GCI Woody, Mind Blower, a Gravity Group Woody, and GaleForce, a multi-launching shuttle coaster by S&S. I was excited when I saw GaleForce. This looked like an interesting roller coaster that had potential to be the next big cloned attraction. But when the reviews started pouring in, mostly fixated on how rough this roller coaster is, my hype diminished greatly. Apparently, the ride was so rough that it had to be retracked during the off-season, reopening in 2018 with entirely new track. The ride stands 125 feet, max speed of 64 miles per hour, with a total track of 1,269 feet. The stats look very similar to its competitor, the Skyrocket 2 model by Premier Rides. However, after getting my first ride on this roller coaster, I realized that those two models couldn't be any different. Presentation. Playland's Castaway Cove is the first boardwalk amusement park that I've been to, so I had no idea what to expect. GaleForce towers over every attraction, serving as the lighthouse to drive the guests into their park. Being so close to the ocean, I expected the paint to be peeling, but in fact, it looked great. The track still has that shiny gloss to it. Being a carnival-style park, I didn't expect any theming, and that ended up being the case. Instead, the real impressive trait is how compact this park is able to crunch in their attractions. The only ding I can give to GaleForce in presentation is its missed opportunity for panoramic views. Every element on this ride is taken at high speeds, so you never really get to soak in your surroundings. With that said, at the top of the first top hat, you do have a quick second to glance around, but instead of facing the ocean, you're looking straight back into the town. If the roller coaster was mirrored, riders would be looking right at the ocean before plummeting down that beyond vertical drop. I think giving GaleForce a score of 6 for presentation seems fair. I'm not going to dock any points for that view, but again, there's not much besides the paint job to boost it higher from the typical 5 rating. Ride intensity. Remember when I said GaleForce is nothing like a Skyrocket 2? Well, it's not, because GaleForce is considerably more intense. The ride starts off with that similar multi-launch to get you up to speed. The first launch isn't much, but the backwards launch has a nice kick. The final launch forward is the strongest launch that gets you to max speed. After that launch, the similarities end. GaleForce crests the top hat, delivering good airtime all around. The drop down is where you will experience your first moment of ejector airtime. It's a beyond vertical plummet that reminds you why GaleForce has OTSRs instead of a traditional lap bar. The ride does a slight bend to the left before climbing right back up into its next element, a really weird element called a kickflip. It starts off like an Immelman, but then transforms into an ejector hill that also has some strong laterals. The next two elements are basically non-inverting loops, loaded with ejector airtime and laterals. In case you haven't picked up on a theme yet, which is ejector airtime and laterals. I touched on it briefly, but I couldn't imagine what GaleForce would be like if it only had lap bars. The laterals are so strong, I think you would smack against the person riding next to you. This is a violent roller coaster that makes you feel like a ragdoll being yanked around by a crazy child. The strongest positives are felt after the first top hat. I grayed out during this spot on my second ride, but only for a moment. The pacing on this roller coaster is top-notch, never slowing down until the LSMs kick in, bringing you back into the station. GaleForce earns a perfect 10 rating in ride intensity. Fun factor. I'm having a tough time ranking the fun factor category because on one hand, the ride is an intense ejector airtime machine, delivering some of the strongest moments of airtime I've ever experienced. And yes, that is coming from a person who has ridden Skyrush, Lightning Rod, Steel Vengeance, and other various RMCs. It really yanks you through every element. The third spike, which is a non-inverting loop, has especially strong ejector and laterals. The other hand, the reason that makes this category so tough is the roughness. Depending on where you are situated, GaleForce can get rough, recreating that uncomfortable jackhammering sensation, but we'll talk more on this later. If I take the roughness aspect out of play, this is a solid 10 for me, but at the same time, I know this roller coaster gave me a headache, so I just can't ignore that aspect. When you look at everything that this coaster has going for it, a good launch, insane ejector, strong laterals, and an interesting layout, a fun factor score of 9 seems more than reasonable. Originality. When looking at this attraction from afar, I could see how someone might consider this to be a Skyrocket 2 ripoff. It's a multi-launching shuttle coaster, but that's really the only similarity. GaleForce is a powerhouse, while Skyrocket 2 focuses on that slow barrel roll. GaleForce is loaded with wacky elements, starting off with that top hat. Riders will get airtime entering and exiting this element, regardless of where you sit. That flip kick maneuver is one of the weirdest looking elements on any roller coaster. Even the non-inverting loops have their own flair with stronger than normal laterals. Also, just looking at the ride, you'd be surprised to know that it has 0 inversions. I can hear some arguments to call a couple of the maneuvers inversions, but RCDB has it listed at 0, which I'm inclined to accept. GaleForce has better pacing than a Skyrocket 2 because it never slows down. There's trim brakes on this ride, but I didn't notice them or sure how much they even slowed the train down. Overall, this is a crazy roller coaster featuring unique elements and maneuvers that you can only experience on this ride. GaleForce earns a perfect 10 score for originality. Ride smoothness. I already said that this ride has some rough spots and it gave me a headache. With that said, it's not all bad. Most of the ride is pretty smooth, with the worst offenders being the flip kick and non-inverting loop. There is no headbanging, just that uncomfortable jackhammering effect that jostles your entire body. I didn't mention this yet, but the OTSRs are actually vest restraints, so they're quite comfortable. Unlike the ones found on a B&M, these vest restraints do not restrict airtime. Honestly, when a coaster is this violent, I don't think any restraint will restrict the airtime. Depending on where you sit will improve or worsen the roughness of the ride. I sat on an end seat during both rides and thought it was somewhat rough. Kara sat in a middle seat and thought it was really smooth. Because I got a headache from this ride, a score of 7 sounds more than fair. The final tally comes to 8.4, which is a great score. For those who love intense roller coasters, you need to add GaleForce to your bucket list. Another aspect I haven't mentioned yet, each ride, the roller coaster completes 2 cycles, which will make the ride feel that much more intense. At $10 a ride, getting a double cycle feels like you're getting your money's worth. The only downside to GaleForce is the roughness, and again, this doesn't seem to affect everyone and is dependent on where you sit. My personal score is going to be an 8.5. If it wasn't for that headache after my second ride, I would be ranking this roller coaster higher. It's a fun, fast-paced, ejector airtime-filled machine. The ride is relentless from start to finish. Just take a look at my expression while riding GaleForce. I think it says everything. So, is this roller coaster worth a visit? I'd say yes. If you're planning a trip to Six Flags Great Adventure, Castaway Cove isn't too far away, maybe about an hour or less. This is an excellent roller coaster. On our way back to the hotel, I asked Kara, like I do every time we ride a new coaster, what she thought of the ride. She surprised me by saying this is one of her favorite roller coasters of all time. So yeah, some will like it more than others, but definitely worth checking out at least once. Well, thank you for watching today's review. What do you think of GaleForce? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please click on the like button and subscribe. That way you continue to get great content brought to you by XscreamThrills.